Please help support the channel by visiting our Amazon store, affiliate link below. Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Matt Jarbo. This is 3 Buck Theater, and this is my review, my what I think of Kingsman: The Golden Circle, the follow-up to 2015's surprise, absolutely kick-ass comic book adaptation. Some people, I think over like in the UK, they saw it early 2014. We here in America saw it February 2015. It went up against the first 50 Shades of Grey movie, which ultimately dominated it in the box office. But where Kingsman: The Golden Circle and 50 Shades differed was, I don't know, people actually enjoying it a week after they saw it. Kingsman is a rare gem of a film. It's a spoof and a satire of the gentleman spy genre. Most importantly, James Bond plays up a lot of those tropes, and the first movie is just a lot of fun to watch. I watched it again last night to get prepared to watch this one. I found myself fully engaged, especially when we got to the church sequence and Freebird started blaring on my TV. I was wholly invested and just gleefully excited to go back into this world with the sequel. So going on from here, there's going to be spoilers, just so you know. If you want to know whether or not I think you should see it, the answer most certainly is yes. Yes. Go check it out. My girlfriend, who, just to put this aside thing here, my girlfriend who couldn't make it through the first time we attempted to watch Kingsman because she thought the violence was too gratuitous, sat through the entire movie while pregnant. I'm talking like 7 months pregnant, and, sat there the whole time, enjoyed the movie immensely. So if a pregnant lady who had trouble with the violence in the first film made it through this one, it's kind of an all ages sort of thing, minus the ages part. It's for everybody, provided they're over a certain age. But anyway, getting into the movie, it takes place a year after the events of the first Kingsman film. Eggsy is now, Galahad completely. He is working for the Kingsman, and he is still dating Tilde, the Swedish princess for whom he went into the cornhole of at the end of the first film. Now, that to me, just right off the bat, was one of those things I really enjoyed. And the reason why is because every time you have a spoof film, or you have a Bond film, Bond will bed 2-3 women and or whatever, and then the next movie he does it all over again. He can never be locked down. Here you've got Eggsy in a relationship with a Swedish princess whom he first engaged in anal intercourse with at the end of the first movie, which, by the way, triggered a whole bunch of SJWs to freak out back then. In fact, my most viewed video on my main channel, Mundane Matt, is me defending the princess joke in Kingsman, so I recommend you guys go check that one out too. But anyway, I just like the fact that they were actually in a relationship and they were committed to one another, so much so that later on when this was tested, Eggsy felt guilty about what was going to happen. I'll get to that though. So basically at this point, Nick, the preppy fucker from the first movie, whose family was rich and Arthur had gotten in, he's still alive. He actually is one of the primary villains of the film. In the aftermath of Valentine's base exploding and everyone's heads blowing up, somehow he lost his arm and his vocal cords, but he's been repaired. He tries to basically hack into Kingsman. Eggsy stops him, or so he thinks. They are able to get on in, and, well, they blow up everybody. They take out Eggsy's house, which unfortunately kills JB and one of Eggsy's best friends. You've got, it takes out all the other knights of the round table, including the new Arthur, and Roxy herself supposedly dies in this explosion. The only two that are left are Merlin and Eggsy, and they decide to enact the Doomsday Protocol, which then takes them to America, to the Statesmen, basically the American cousins, while they try to figure out what's going on with the Golden Circle, who is led by very kind of bubblegum pop-esque Poppy Adams, played by Julianne Moore, and her entire arc for why she's doing what she's doing, again, is something that I found to be fascinating. It wasn't a world domination plot, which is essentially what Valentine was doing in the first movie. This is one where she wants to directly impact the world, but she's not trying to dominate. She just wants to, to get a good bottom line. And so her entire plot is to release tainted narcotics, because she apparently is the largest and most successful drug dealer in the world that no one knows about. She's so secretive, and she's tired of living in the shadows. Now she releases tainted narcotics, to which case only she has the antidote, and basically holds the world hostage in order for them, and check this out, to legalize drugs. I'm not even kidding you. The allegory of this movie is that it is basically talking about ending the war on drugs, because it's utterly pointless. Even the president's, like, chief of staff or vice president. I'm not entirely too sure who it is. We don't really know. She goes on this impassioned plea for drug users as not being the enemy, whereas the president himself, played by Bruce Greenwood, is very much on board with the, just let them all die. And the kind of like, current event relation to that was more like, Rodrigo Duterte out of the Philippines, who has these death squads that literally go and hunt and kill drug users. And that's kind of the mentality I took from this. But at the same time, the Kingsmen team up with the Statesmen, where they meet Tequila, played by Channing Tatum, in a brief but very memorable role, and one that will probably, if they get the third Kingsman movie, will be much greater. Yeah, Jeff Bridges playing Champ, or Champagne, and he's the guy in charge, and he's as charismatic and awesome as usual. And then you've got Pedro Pascal as Agent Whiskey. Now, Pedro Pascal, you might know him as Oberyn Martell from Game of Thrones, and the dude just oozes charisma the entire movie. I thought he was fantastic, and I really loved his character. Sad what happened to him at the end, but, and they all team up, and they go to this, Whiskey and and Eggsy go to this music festival in order to basically hook up with Nick's girlfriend to put a tracker on her. Well, the tracker has to be in her in a biblical sense. And this is where the whole thing I mentioned earlier about Eggsy having reservations about doing this. His girlfriend, Princess Tildy, she knows who he is. She knows what he does. She is okay with what he does. But he calls her and he's like, I have to kind of bang this chick. It's part of the job. And then she gets really upset at him, and she, she's like mad at him for doing it. And then he understands where it's like you have your duty and you have your obligation to your relationships and how they're going to conflict here. And he ends up fingering the girl anyway, but he doesn't have sex with her. He doesn't finish the job, but he does get the implant put in there, and they're able to track her to a location to go and get the antidote. What I like though is the reintroduction of Harry Hart, person we thought was dead, clearly being shot in the head in Kentucky. Oddly enough, Kentucky is also where Statesman's located. I picked that up last night when I was rewatching the first movie, because where that hate group was in Kentucky. So that's kind of what plays into it. Is Ginger Ale, the Merlin equivalent of Statesman, played by Halle Berry, picks up on the signal disruption by Valentine, and it's only like 11 miles away from the church. And then her and Tequila go out there. They discover Harry. They don't know who he is. They're able to keep him alive using this alpha gel and nanites to repair the flesh and tissue and everything. And as a result of that, he has amnesia, doesn't know who he is, but they don't know who he is either. They just know that he's someone who does intelligence, but they just don't know where. And so that, again, was a very kind of interesting angle brought into it, where you're dealing with Harry trying to come out of this very tragic event. Merlin and Eggsy are just like so happy that he's alive, given everything else that's happened, and they want to make sure that everyone is, that they're stopping this and they're going to be able to continue being Kingsmen. And then, of course, they get to the whole situation with Pedro Pascal with Agent Whiskey. Harry deems him a double agent, shoots him. Eggsy puts the alpha gel on him, sends him back home, and then they head off in order to go and fight Poppy head on. Now, the final action scene here was fantastic in my opinion. It wasn't, they didn't have a scene that was as crazy or as ballsy as the church scene. They didn't have anything similar to that in terms of that level of violence. But this particular scene was full of just, a lot of improvised gunplay, using a lot of gadgets and a lot of accessories, and very much kind of pulling in from the Roger Moore era of Bond films, which I thought was really cool too. Like because Poppy had taken this, old ancient ruins in Cambodia and turned it into like 1950s middle America, complete with like Poppy's Diner, Poppy's Bowling, Poppy's Salon, Poppy Mart, all of these Poppies, everything, this real like narcissistic mindset, which again, I really liked the aesthetics that went into her character. And there's this part where you got the Poppy Salon, and there's two guys, behind some cover firing at Harry, and they've got like, this pair of scissors, this huge pair of scissors is aiming over them. And so Harry shoots it, and they both get impaled at the same time. And I thought that was just wonderful. They shoot this, there's like Poppy donuts, and there's a huge donut on top. They shoot the donut hole, and it rolls, and they use it as portable cover, while Eggsy is using his briefcase to fire off a machine gun, very similar to what we would see in maybe Desperado. So the movie, it just went all out for this scene. I thought it was awesome. But at the same time, there's also a cameo I haven't mentioned yet. It's been kind of playing off and on through the film. That would be Elton John popping up. And Elton John was great. He was kidnapped as a result of the confusion that happened with the Valentine situation. Poppy kidnapped him, holds him hostage, makes him perform whenever she wants. And of course, he wants to get away. But, you know, she's got her 2 robotic dog, Benny and Jet. You know, I mean, just seems to kind of flow on in with all that they're friend. They look at Elton John as a friend. They're not going to attack him. And so he ends up trying to break free, and him and Harry end up taking out one of the dogs. I think it was Benny. And then the Jet goes after Harry. And again, it's like you have all this stuff happening all at one time. A lot of people have complained that the film is overbloated. They complain that the film is just insane. There's so much going on, and to that I would actually agree. But ultimately, the core plot line, you've got the Kingsman being destroyed because you've got Poppy, the world's most profitable drug dealer. She wants to come into the mainstream, so she kind of holds the world hostage in order to get them to legalize drugs, so then it can be regulated and taxed. She makes sure to say that it's supposed to be regulated and taxed in order to basically kind of come into the spotlight as the supplier of these tainted drugs, so she can then make more money. And it's one of those ballsy plays that I do think kind of runs parallel with where we currently stand in terms of the war on legalizing drugs and trying to end just the war on drugs for how wasteful it's been over the course of the past 30 plus years. So there was an element of there that I quite liked. You had the president who was like, I don't care about these people, let them die. I've read some comments that kind of compared it to like the Trump administration. This, of course, tying into the end when there's a big, there's a big thing on there about the president being impeached because the vice president was also like a pot user or something. And he had her locked up thinking she was going to die. She ended up getting the antidote. So then she led the impeachment hearing, charges herself. So there's all those elements that went into it. And it said on the screen, president to be impeached or something, which might be a general nod at the current state of political affairs here in the United States. But movies like these are not made in a vacuum. Kingsman was shot before Donald Trump was elected. So I think it's just a coincidence. I'm not reading into that too much. Some people out there I wouldn't be surprised if some people, like the guy who created #DumpStarWars, went and saw this and then got a bee in his bonnet about it. That's basically what I would figure. But at the end of the day, Kingsman was a really, really good sequel. Not as good, I think, as the first one, because the first one at the time felt so fresh and felt so new. This one being about 3 years later, still continued that feeling, but there were moments where it got a little bit slower. Stuff with Harry, a little bit too much time with that. The fact that Merlin died, I didn't really care for, especially going out the way he went out. Kind of felt like it could have been handled a little bit better. I get it though, like him humming, singing John Denver to lure in bad guys because he stepped on a landmine. And that's how he's going to go out is one thing. Roxy dying, JB dying, like killing off a lot of the cast and a lot of the other Kingsmen. It felt very odd that they would go this route for the second film, but it kind of leaves it still at a bit of a somber note, but also one that shows hope, because at the end, Eggsy marries Tildy, which is pretty funny that he marries Tildy, and again, something that James Bond would never do. So it's again, a lot of conventions are kind of tossed on their ear, and the movie itself is a lot of fun. Definitely one I'm going to be adding to my Blu-ray collection when it comes out. Matthew Vaughn, in my opinion, knocked it out of the park as usual. The soundtrack is great. The action is fantastic. The only complaint I'll make is the lack of blood. There is blood, but there is not a lot of blood. 2 dudes get fed into a meat grinder, and there's not a lot of blood, right? Like there's just not. And, people getting shot. There's digital blood, but there's not a great deal of blood spatter. I found that detail to have been omitted as something that I think is an interesting point for the production. I wonder, I've heard rumors from people that there was a big push to make it tamer because the church scene was so violent and volatile from the first film that it's been completely omitted when the movie is shown on cable television, which I understand. It is, it's crazy. So they might have toned it down. And the stuff that they toned down, it's still pretty violent. I mean, a dude gets cut in half from an electric whip and there's no blood spatter. There's no blood leak. You know what I mean? Like maybe to cauterize the wounds. I don't know. I'm sure it probably did. That's the argument that people will use. but other things like that as well. So anyway, I loved it. I highly recommend it. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Again, sorry I ramble on for so long with these things. I never really have a set direction. I just start talking about it. And I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a great day, and peace out.